A year ago today, Mitch Keller was the worst pitcher in baseball that ever existed in all of mankind, right? As YouTube expressed to everyone. But no, it was it's a pretty bad showing by Mitch Keller. And like a year ago, Jim and I had a conversation. I think in the preseason, offseason, I should say, of like where do you see Mitch Keller in the future? If you were a betting man, would you bet him being in this organization in 2 years or being DFA'd? And I know I'll speak for myself. Jim, you can speak for yourself. I said if I'm a betting man, I'm betting on he's being DFA'd in the future. Jim?
I don't remember that conversation, to be honest. But I don't think I would have said DFA'd. I don't think I would have said that. Yeah, I don't think I was ready to write him off. Like I thought maybe he just wasn't gonna. I didn't think he was gonna be the guy we thought he was gonna be. But I thought he could still find enough of it to carve out like a number 5 starter role on a team. But yeah, no one would have anticipated this. I sure didn't.
I think the reason that I would have expected them to have a longer leash on him is because this new regime came in post Huntington, and the one thing they needed to do was develop pitchers. And he was really the first test case they had, right? He is haven't screwed up this kid, hasn't reached the majors yet, top prospect. And so once he gets there and he gets punched in the mouth and then punched again, and then 3 years later still getting punched in the mouth, like they needed to fix that guy. They couldn't go let the Texas Rangers or somebody else pick him up and fix that guy. And if Mitch Keller becomes who they thought Mitch Keller was going to be at age 27 or who he is right now in a different organization, I mean, like that, then we're just refreshing what we've already done. And the entire like meaning behind that change was we're going to change our development path. We're going to change the way we go about things, the mentality we use, the philosophy we use. And he was the prime shining example of you have to get this one right. And so because the guys they traded away, they weren't products of this new regime, right? James and Tyone was developed. Trevor Williams and Chad Cooler as developed as they're going to be. Joe Musgrove wasn't somebody that was built up in the Pirate system. And so Mitch was the guy they needed to prove it with. And so that's why I always thought they'd have a longer leash. But a year ago, it's a 6.12 career ERA. Like you can no longer justify keeping that guy in the rotation. And so the way this story started, if you don't mind jumping into some of the background on it, was so I live in the Boston area now, and the Pirates had come through. Sorry, Tigers background. Pirates had come through second series of the season. I talked to Mitch, had a really good conversation. I've always jived well with him, with his family, with people in his circle. I just following him coming up through the system. And he just seemed in such a better place coming off of the way last season ended. Opening day wasn't great, but he just seemed so much more confident. And so we were standing against the dugout railing before a game, I guess during BP, and got to talking just about the idea of like growth and evolution at the major league level, which is something that we see a lot, I think, but don't always talk about, where, especially with top pitching prospects, you get to the majors and almost nobody just has an easy time of it. You have to change something. You're going to discover when you get to the majors, like, what is it about me that hitters have an easy time with? And sometimes, like with Mitch, his fastball, like they had no problem with a Mitch Keller fastball. The velocity went down, and that was another problem with it. But even then, like his breaking stuff wasn't special. He got to the majors and he didn't look special whatsoever. And then you find out, he doesn't have the command, and so they can actually just sit on stuff. Like he became a 6 ERA pitcher. And so, the conversation was, how did you get here today? And like all these iterations of who Mitch Keller was that he had to change over the years. We got talking through that, and turned out I didn't record half of it, so I didn't have a zillion quotes from him, but it was really enlightening. It was thoughtful stuff from him. And also I felt like I needed to see more. I feel like I wasn't justified writing that week 2 of the season saying, look, here's how Mitch Keller fixed everything and got back on track, because, he needs to keep proving it. And, not that I I'm worried about looking stupid, but is there a chance he got back to being a 4 or 5 ERA? Yeah, totally. But is it more powerful if you wait a couple months and then, you're talking mid-May and he's got a 2-something ERA, and then you run that story and you talk to people and get some more perspective on it. That's what I ended up doing. But as I was writing it, the initial way I had it was something I actually done with Tyler Glasnow when he was pitching for the Rays in the postseason, and that kind of just blew my mind a couple years ago that Tyler Glasnow was pitching in the postseason, and people were stoked about it. Because I'd seen these stops along the way and talked to him on these little days when he was at these rock bottoms. And so the way I was thinking about this Mitch story initially was the same deal. All right, when's the first time I remember talking to him? When's the first time I watched one of his games? It was like opening day of the year he debuted, 2019, at AAA. Sky's the limit. Ceiling couldn't be higher. Nothing has really gone wrong. Hasn't had major injury. And then what's the next scene? It's like his debut. He gets rocked in the first inning, and like embarrassing level of rocked. The next scene is like it's a year later, and he just hasn't gotten anything right. A year later, he's like, I'm asking him on Zoom after the game, like, is this eating at you? And he's like, I'm the most pissed off guy in the room. It was like the one quote we ever really got from him. Mm-hmm. And then a year after that, he's getting kicked to the bullpen. So it's like a series of like, it's like falling down the stairs. You know, he just keeps hitting another low, and you never know whether another one's coming. You just assume another one is coming. And then you see him just like suddenly pull out of it in the last year. And so I wanted to like, wow. How'd you do it? I've read stories about you going to the sinker. I've read about the development of the sweeper, all that sort of stuff. But like, how did you do it, and how does it feel to be going through that? So that was sort of the impetus for the story.
Yeah, I mean, right from the beginning there, actually, after you talk about the 1 year ago today, the quote that you have from his dad, just it was a good one. Like he's like, "Oh my God, really? I guess someone has to be there, but it sucks when it's your kid." So yeah, I mean, definitely you got a lot of good quotes from the family. You got some quotes from Keller. You got some some quotes, and it sounds like you really dove deep into his off season training regimen with Tread. So I guess we're now to the point he gets kicked. Well, I mean, let's kind of rewind a little bit, because really the story starts in the off season. Between 2021 and 2022. That video gets posted on social media, and we're all like, oh my God, Mitch Keller can throw 100 miles an hour, right? And the slider's looking good. Like, the stuff looks good. And so you're excited about Mitch Keller coming out 2022, and he's still getting rocked. Like, he's still
same dude, yeah.
Yeah, he looks like the exact same guy. It's like, what happened to this Mitch Keller that we saw during the offseason? He's now just kind of reverted back to the same thing. So I guess kind of just speak to that a little bit. How did that all start? At some point Keller had to have realized, like, I need to do something or I'm going to be out of this sport.
Yeah.
And you even touched on that at one point where, like, he started looking for other jobs at one point. So I guess let's kind of rewind to off season prior to 2022. How did that whole thing start? How did he find Tread? What did they do to him that helped him get to where he is?
If I can rewind even farther, I mentioned that game where he said, like, I'm the most pissed off guy in the room. That was, I have the date on here somewhere, June 10th of 2021. Home start against the Dodgers. Got blown up, and he'd gotten blown up in most of his starts so far in the 2021 season. And I remember after that season, literally, like, my lead after that game was about how Mitch Keller's not going to get sent down to the minors. They're going to keep rolling him out there. They have to, but here, like, it's bad. And the next day they send him to the minors. And so he spends two months. Well, because it's like, well, what are you going to do? He's like the best prospect you have, and he's not a prospect anymore. And you need to let him figure things out at the major league level. But they'd done that for 3 years. And so they send him to the minors. And so I asked him to go back to that headspace. Like, do you remember me asking that question? Because I've thought for like years, like, maybe that was kind of an unfair question. Like, because it was if you've watched his interviews, like, so even keel, just kind of explains, like, here's what went wrong. And I was like, hey man, a little hard to get a read over Zoom, but, like, is this eating at you? Is this like, do you take this home with you? And he kind of like, but he's like, yeah, I'm the most pissed off guy in the room. And then they ended the interview. And I always thought, like, I wonder if that was, like, fair, if I just kind of, like, I didn't usually ask a question in that way. And all the other reporters were like, you just got, like, an actual like emotion out of Mitch. So, like, we all appreciate it. And so it was never looked back negatively, but I was like, take me back there now that you're in a better place. And he was like, dude, he didn't remember me asking the question. So I guess I'm off the hook, but he was like, nothing was right. My mechanics were wrong. My velocity was down. I was in the wrong headspace. Like, nothing was right. And when you're in those situations, like, it's just so frustrating. But that ended up being extremely different from the place he was in a year ago when he gets pushed to the bullpen, where I was like, was that like more of a rock bottom? And he's like, no, actually the difference there was I felt really good. It's like everything felt right and the results still were terrible, like worse than baseball terrible. And so that's how I knew all we needed to do was like tweak some pitch mix stuff, which is way easier. Tinkering is way easier than like overhauling. And so to that offseason, yeah, he comes off of the 2021 season. Numbers are still really bad. He's throwing short starts. He's not even like going deep. They're not even trying to get him deep into games. If he gets into the fourth and throws 80 pitches, whatever. Hey Matt, thank you, dude. Then that's a win, I guess. And so it was almost like we were looking for. It was suddenly like this former one of the top prospects in baseball. Like when he had a good outing, it was kind of like the fluke, right? Rather than when he had you have a bad outing, you're like, yeah, shake it off, fluke. But like, no, when he has a good result, that's weird. That's the point we'd gotten to with him. Same with Glasnow in Pittsburgh. And so he goes on the recommendation of Clay Holmes, who had by then gotten traded to the Yankees, to tread in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Ben Brewster, a former minor leaguer, I don't think he ever made the majors. He has co-founded that place and got it up and running as a place where it's what we have nowadays, right? It's like a pitching lab where you can go. It's built for a Mitch Keller, right? You can go reinvent yourself, but go build a new weapon for your arsenal. You can hone the pitches you have. You can figure out what works, what doesn't. And teams are doing this, right? Some teams are more advanced than others with having their own internal pitching labs. The Pirates aren't really known for that per se. Like they were known for Ray Sears turning guys around. They're known for having good relationships with guys. They're not known for having like the high-tech lab, which I'm sure they do some of it. I'm not as close to the team today to like know how in depth they do on all that. But I do also know through this process, like they work pretty closely with these external labs. Like I think it's great if you can do that as well. Like that's a pretty important thing. Guys are going to go in the off season to work with these other places, whether that's Driveline or Tread or what have you. And so you need to be working closely with them in the training program. And so the first step for them, Devin Hayes was his training coordinator, was we got to get the velocity back. Because if we don't have the velocity, Devin said, like, we could add all these pitches and do all the magic with them, and he could be like a 4 or 5 pitcher. Like, and that'd be fine. He'd have a major league career, and we'd like it would not be like embarrassing to put up the results he's putting up. But he had more upside when he came up and had the ability to throw upper 90s. Right? It doesn't have to be every pitch, but if you can have that in the tank, that's going to really help everything. Everything plays off of velocity in this day and age. And so the first thing he did was build up velocity with weighted ball stuff, techniques, mechanics. I mean, it's just like nerdy baseball pitching stuff about the way you get down the mound, the way you use your momentum, the way you build, the whole kinetic chain, the kinetic energy. So he builds it up. He's got velocity. We all saw it, right? He goes and pops 101, 102 on the radar gun, and people think that's it. That's all Mitch Keller needed. And then he's getting like every other start, he's getting rocked at the start of the 22 season, right? And then he has 2 in a row bad against the Reds, who I need to look up his career ERA against the Reds. It has to be like 300.
It's not good. Yeah.
And that's when they say like, hey, we need to hit like unplug there. And talking to Ben Cherington, he was like, yeah, we fully expected he'd be back in the rotation. This wasn't the same thing as us sending him to the minors. Okay, wireless Grace. We'll get all as nerdy as we can get here. But it wasn't like when we sent him to the minors, he was a lot closer. We knew that, but still like the results justified us changing something. And so when he to get up to sort of the point in time you're talking about, that's like he gets sent to the bullpen, and it's essentially like, hey, let's go work on something, but we know big changes need to happen here, but we know like what ballpark those changes are in. It's not your mechanics are off, your conditioning is off, any of that. Your command is the problem, although it's always been a bit of a problem and it will probably continue to be a problem. Then this is something we need to change on a more pitch mix level.
Well, thank you for watching. I know we try to provide the most entertaining content that we can, and we'd love to spread it to as many people as possible. So I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you could take the 5 seconds to like this video and subscribe to the page, it helps out so much more than you know. Thank you, and let's go Bucks.